This is, of course, the spiritual sequel, kind of slash remake slash reboot of 1996's Twister. We find ourselves 28 years later, where we meet Daisy Edgar-Jones as Kate, a Oklahoma-based tornado chaser who is, like in the first film, suffered a storm-related tragedy, leaves the field, goes to New York to work behind a weather desk where it's nice and safe. She eventually gets called back to Oklahoma by Anthony Ramos's hobby, who says, "Hey, we got this new investor and this great technology to help track storms and give people warning, but we got to do it a little bit differently. You remember Dorothy from the first film? Well, we got this new thing, and we got to kind of do a little bit different." And they're actually like the corporate sleaze, that they have sleek vehicles and matching uniforms. Enter Glenn Powell as Tyler Owens, a tornado wrangler with a YouTube following. He's a YouTuber, and he's got this ragtag crew that has all these cameras and drones, and they have a posse of people following them around, and they're kind of wild and erratic, and they're the de facto competition. And so we have these two forces. We have man versus nature, man versus man, and then, of course, the Twisters themselves. We got to get out there. We got to get this equipment in there, and then we got to avoid danger, and also fight some inner demons as well, not unlike the first film. So that's our setup. Zach, what'd you think?
So we covered 1996 Twister just last week on the pod. I'm sure we got a link somewhere for people who want to check that out. But I wanted to see, stepping into Twisters, obviously this being a nostalgia property, coming back to it. What's changed? What's different? How has the world changed since 1996 when Twister came out, right? Like, is the weather bigger? Are the Twisters badder? Obviously, I think Glenn Powell's going to be strong. Daisy Edgar-Jones looks great. Really, if you start to look at the cast, you begin to see, almost like OG Twister, a who's who of all kinds of talent in Hollywood, which makes it a fun watch, especially if you're familiar with a lot of their work. Like Katie O'Brien appears in this movie. David Corenswet is in this film. I didn't even know he was in here. The next Superman is in Twisters. So it's an exciting watch. But I think watching it so close to the old one also points out a unique flaw in the presentation of Twisters. And that is, it's just like the old movie. They just move some parts around and they're just putting the same pizza back out under the hot plate. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a real phrase, but it just feels real samey. And while it's very big and it's very spectacle, and I get why people are comparing it to Top Gun Maverick, it is putting butts in seats, it is making money. It's a little maybe it's a little shallow, and I don't know if spectacle is enough to carry it to anything more than just that, a summer spectacle, which is clearly making a killing. So I'm excited to talk about it. Where do you want to jump in?
Well, I want to kind of talk about how the original Twister has been recently described. We both saw this on Twitter as a 5-star, 3-star movie. Like, it's not an Oscar-winning great film, but it's a brilliant, like, disaster kind of comedy slash rom-com film. It just works so well. The tornado stuff, the relationships with our characters, our bad guys, our good guys. It's just classic Hollywood filmmaking, and it just works so well. And nothing about this movie, the new one, really works. And it should, because we have big effects, we have a big budget, we got stars. Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar-Jones are doing really good work with what they have. But the script is weak. It is so weak, and it's following a lot of the same beats. Of course, we have a character that's got suffers a tragic incident, has some PTSD from it, and they got these. They got to work together with kind of their competition, and it follows all these beats, but it just does not work. You do not care about the conflict or the characters the way you did in the first one, and that's really the biggest problem. But there are things that do work that we can get into. I think it's really well made and well acted, and but it's weak in a lot of ways, surprisingly.
Yeah, I'm going to come out on the other side. I think there is stuff that works for sure. And I want to highlight that, because while I do agree, I think the script is functionally weak. It's just, God, it's so much like the old one. I want to talk about the stuff that I like. All right. And number one, that's going to be our setting. Oklahoma never looked so good. And Lee Isaac Chung, who formerly directed Minari, has a ton of experience shooting farmlands. And while it's funny that like the twisters in this movie would blow right through the farm in Minari, like it's worth mentioning that there's like a real sincerity to capturing like the green of these fields and most importantly like the threat of the skies. Like seeing our characters like presented up against what they're facing, like the force of nature, it can be genuinely seat rattling, especially if your theater's loud enough. Like we get drone shots, helicopter coverage, we get like shots right on cars, we get shots of people out by themselves running, trying to escape stuff, like big kinetic action in the way this movie is shot. And I think you feel it on the biggest screen you can see it on. This especially is extended to Tyler Owens, Glenn Powell's character's work on YouTube. Him and his team are like filming a bunch of stuff, and you get a lot of like GoPro footage. You get like a shot mounted to like the windshield wiper in the car. Like you get a bunch of really creative stuff just because they have this framework in there, and that's a good time. But it also presents like a lot of characters that have a lot of kind of conflicting interests or just get bumped off like for the last like third of the movie because they don't really have anything to do. That's part of that complicated script we were talking about. But I think the setting and like the look of this movie are real solid. And of course, I think a good segue into cast, Glenn Powell, who is a movie star.
Who could do no wrong at this
Who
point.
cannot miss? Even in Hitman, he was the best part. It's amazing. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think this movie does look very good. The way it's shot, a lot of the practical effects and sets, like they got all these cars that are done up with all this like radar and cameras, and all that stuff is very tactile and really puts you in the movie the way the original did, because their cars were all decked out with storm equipment. So we have that, and we have a lot of driving scenes. It actually reminded me a little bit of Fury Road or Mad Max, because you have competing groups of cars chasing stuff. There's a lot of driving in the movie. That stuff works really, really well and is a lot of fun. And a lot of the, when the storms show up, a lot of the stuff, wind blowing everywhere, things getting blown over. It starts to get a little video gamey though, because, in 96, it was incredible because you'd never seen anything like that. Now effects are so good, it's not really that much of a surprise that you create a whole tornado and destruction, and it just begins to look a little bit too fake, but it melts together good enough.
Yeah, that's one of the other things I think that kind of hurts this movie is like shattering the illusion when you're not quite convinced. And a lot of the tornadoes look rad, especially there's this one, you can see it in the trailer footage we're running. There's this like fire tornado that spins up when a twister hits like this oil refinery or something. And that looks like a couple of those shots look like they fell right out of Fury Road. Like it looks just like that big sandstorm at the beginning, big red like explosions. That stuff looks great. But you're also watching your fourth tornado of the film, and it's like, okay, I feel like I've seen this song and dance before. We run towards tornado, bad things happen, we run away from tornado. 96 Twister does it too, and they have 4 tornadoes in the original Twister. This one dials it up and also dials up the danger, which is notable. I was surprised watching 96 Twister how much of the cast survives that movie. I figured it was going to be like a slasher film. They were just going to be cutting down the whole time. I kept waiting for Philip Seymour Hoffman to get sucked into the suck zone, but it never happened. And in this movie, you actually get a bit more satisfaction that way. It is notably deadlier, and that's good. I was watching this movie and there were like families in there. There was a kid a couple seats down from me. I was like, he's gonna be rattled by a couple of these, man. There's not many, but they're effective. It's people crying for help, don't let it get me, which I like could not stop laughing at in the theater. Like that all can be fun, it can be exciting.
Tornado.
Like that, it gives it like a real sense of energy. Like I felt like when I was watching it, like not only was my theater crowded for a midday, people were excited in there, man. Like a couple claps, like people getting going, like, and that's why I want to talk about that kind of Top Gun Maverick comparison towards the end of this.
Yeah, we have some of the things that don't really work are just some of our plot elements that come to fruition. Daisy Edgar-Jones and Glenn Powell have this enemies to lovers storyline where they're the competition, but then they have some conversations. And they're like, "Oh, you're not so bad yourself, kid," and they end up rescuing each other. And Daisy Edgar-Jones uses the Force to read tornadoes, like Bill Paxton did in the first one. Their romance is like they're both charismatic, but the romance isn't super convincing. I think it probably works for some people. I think one of the things that doesn't work is there's some other plot lines of that the investor they're working for may not have the most kind of altruistic motives. There might be some other something else going on, and it's like the most undercooked plot. And there's a part where they're like, oh, we got to go get the equipment, it got blown away, and Daisy Edgar-Jones is like, no, we got to go back to this town and help people. And I'm like, what are you gonna do? You guys you gonna hand out water, you gotta rebuild a house, like it's already been devastated. Like there's a whole lot of like, no, we got to go help the people. And I'm like, you literally have nothing to offer them.
Yeah. Additionally, like one of the kind of major conflicts in the film is like not outlined all that good. I realize like in one of like kind of the turn from the second act to the third act, a couple of characters are having this big confrontation. They're fighting about this landowner out in Oklahoma and this guy who's hired this team and what their goals are and how they don't really understand that and why they're having this conflict. And I was sitting there watching, I was like, the kids in this theater are not going to get any of this. And maybe they're not there for that. That's fine. But I don't recall 96 Twister ever having that problem. Additionally, I've seen a lot of people talking about Daisy Edgar-Jones's performance. I'm going to come out in defense of Daisy Edgar-Jones. All right. Here's the thing. I think her character is stunted in a way that makes her a dull watch for too much of this movie. Right.
This is true.
Bill Paxton in the original film, he has walked back from being a storm chaser. He's been a meteorologist. He has knocked off that ivory tower in his opening scene. People are inviting him. Welcome back, Bill. I'm not back. Like he immediately starts to get that energy. Yeah, that energy and vibe back to go chase again. And then that's what happens over the course of the movie. Like we see him come out of that. We see that like flare of excitement in his eyes. Daisy Edgar-Jones, however, is stunted from the opening of the film. She starts exciting. She falls back into herself. She moves back to New York. I'm not going to chase storms anymore. That's her for like the next 90 minutes of the feature. And like that is a bit of a drag. And that's not Daisy Edgar-Jones's fault. If anything, she plays that role well. She does not want to be out there. It is hazardous. She's away from it. She's traumatized by it even. But it makes it a tough watch. And it bums me out that people are dogging on her performance because I think she did a great job. Like I think she's great in this movie. She's no complaints about Daisy Edgar-Jones. Her character, however, bit of a wet blanket.
Yeah, everyone does well with what they're given. Her accent does take a bit of a walk around the southern U.S. Daisy Edgar-Jones is British, and she's playing a southern girl from Oklahoma. And she sometimes will have this real thick southern accent, and then sometimes it just disappears. And she never sounds British, but she does like neutral American to southern and kind of in and out. But I think she's fine for, again, she's given a weak character that's not very exciting. Glenn Powell is great as Tyler Owens, this like a cocky jock with a heart of gold. Anthony Ramos is good, kind of sidelined a lot of the movie, but the ragtag bunch which mirrors the original film is a lot of fun. We have Brandon Perea, who we previously had seen in Nope, playing a character called Boone, is real funny. Again, Sasha Lane.
Katie O'Brien is one of the.
Thank you, Katie O'Brien. That's the other one I was thinking of. But that, like, those guys are a lot of fun. They got a lot of good lines. I almost wish we kind of stuck with them a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the maybe problems in the movie is it has to kind of wander off and have a bit more of a primary conflict, especially between our two romantic leads, Daisy Edgar-Jones and Glenn Powell. It leaves a lot of other characters pushed to the side. Namely, somebody I did not know was in this movie, David Corenswet, future Superman, is in this. And he's playing the evil, like, Cary Elwes kind of character. You know, he's wearing, like, a hat, and he's like, we gotta go out there and chase storms. Right, yeah, he's the science boy who's like, shut up, I can read my charts, and, like, so stupid. But I think he even reads it the right way. Like, he can watch Cary Elwes in 96 Twister and see what that character is. He's kind of this goofy caricature of what's supposed to be a bad dude. He's not ultimately that bad of a guy. And like, he plays that perfect here too. He's like shouting at Anthony Ramos. Like, great. Big fan of what he's doing in this movie. I like the cast. I want to kind of curb this to recommendations by talking about this comparison to Top Gun Maverick. People have been saying this is putting people in seats. This is like mom and dad are coming back out to the theater again, right? Like, it feels like kind of that same energy of that very American flag flying summer blockbuster, baby, right? Like we're in Oklahoma and by God, we're going to the movies. And I think that's all well and good, but I think Top Gun Maverick had something that Twisters doesn't, and that's a real tight script, man, with a real good plot. Even though it was simple, it worked, and pretty much everybody who saw Maverick could immediately tell you what the plot of that movie is. Twisters is fine, but it does get tired, just like the 96 Twister. On their fourth tornado, you're like, boy, I'm tired of them running at and subsequently turning away from tornadoes. I do think the movie's doing well. It's probably getting a sequel. I don't know what Twister 3 looks like, but whatever it's going to be, it's going to have to evolve more than this one does, because this feels a whole lot like a remix and a lot less like something original. And I think people deserve more. I think the American public deserves a finer class of Twister. That's what I think.
I definitely wanted to say one last thing about pacing. The first hour of this, I think, is pretty fun and exciting. And then for some reason, at when we enter Act 3, after the kind of all is lost moment, it just slams on the brakes, and we get like 20 minutes of hanging out at someone's house, talking about our feelings and our trauma and all this. And I'm like, what are we doing? We've just had like 90 minutes of a like pretty exciting movie, and then it just slams on the brakes. And it was just like, God, get back in the truck, go chase another store. What are we doing here? It's a little bit too long. Could probably shave like 20 minutes off.
Yeah.
It's a full 2
also,
hours.
One other thought for me before final recommendations. I'm not a country music boy, but if I was, I would think Twisters had a pretty good soundtrack. Some people are saying it's on the nose, but again, I'm not a country music boy, and there's some toe tappers in there. I don't know. Go check it out on Spotify, or better yet, go check out Twisters in theaters. Andy, would you recommend Twisters?
I'd recommend this to kind of casual film goers, like take your mom, take your dad, take like people who don't go to movies very often, maybe see 1 or 2 a year, take the kids. It's a family affair. It is a lot of fun for the first hour. It looks really good. We have good effects. We have stars. The plot's a little thin. You don't get invested in the characters or the conflict as much as the original, which is a classic. But it's a fun summer blockbuster. It's a little bit too long. It could be cut about 15 to 20 minutes shorter. But overall, it's fun. If you're not interested in that, save it for streaming.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. It is a spectacle feature, I think. And I think that's enough. Like, go get the big popcorn. Get the big Diet Coke. Eat the gummy, hit the pen, go watch Twisters. You're going to have a great time. Like, don't overthink it. You know, like that's what Twisters is, and that's what it's supposed to be. And I think it's a fun time. Anybody looking for anything more complicated, you're going to have to wait till next summer, because there's going to be more disaster movies. Twisters is starting something here. They're going to make another. I almost guarantee they're going to make another one of these. They gotta. Like, it's too good of a winning formula to not use. I don't know what they're going to do next. Twisters on the water, Twisters 2, 3, cruise control. We're going to see. But one thing's for sure, like, there's something moving with Twisters. And I hope
Twisters
everybody
and the E is a 3.
It's got to be, right? Twisters with the 3E, or it's going to be Twisters subtitle, right? Like, I don't know. Twisters Reckoning. Yeah, it's something. Anyway, with that, we should move on to our middle segment. Typically, we watch trailers in here, upcoming things. Maybe have a conversation about the state of cinema. What do we call this, Andy?
It's time for the death of cinema.